Welcome to Cal's Conversations. I'm Will Reese with Next Level Sports and the director of Cal's. We are excited to have you with us today for our fourth Cal's Conversation with some special guests from longtime Cal's partner AECOM, discussing a very important topic as we plan for a return of student athletes and fans to stadiums, arenas, and other facilities in the months to come. We've had a great time bringing you these webinars over the last month plus. We've averaged around 400 people on each session, and we'll continue to look for ways to add value to this community going forward as the reopening process is beginning in many places. Greatly also appreciate all the kind emails and notes and suggestions. We'll continue to evaluate as we go on here, and people are getting back to the offices what the needs are, and we'll try to get timely conversations in place as we have in the past. Next, I'd like to take a chance to introduce our panel here. First, we've got Mac Astorga. Mac is an environmental risk management team leader for AECOM with the return to services effort. Mac is one of AECOM's lead authorities in real estate portfolio asset management, serving large real estate owners for almost 30 years. Mac's career is focused on providing expert advice and oversight in corporate risk management and business strategy, with an emphasis in environmental real property portfolio management. We also have Martha Boss, who is AECOM certified industrial hygienist. Martha's an expert in risk management with 29 years of experience. The various resilient determinations of her work have been used to support development of environmental health and safety program criteria and implementation worldwide. Areas of expertise include industrial hygiene studies to determine contaminant spread and dispersion analysis, statistical parameters, severity, and probability assessment for health risks, toxicology profiling, determination of applicable occupational chemical exposure limits and biological safety levels, laser safety, and electromagnetic frequency studies. Martha's an editor and author of several of the most prominent articles in this space. John Nemeth is a Cal staple, been with us at Cal several times on our panels, and vice president of AECOM Sports. He is an expert with over 25 years of venue experience with regard to planning, design, and project development. Also extremely excited to have with us our host, Hunter Yurachek, Vice Chancellor and Director of Athletics at the University of Arkansas. Hunter's been at the U of A since 2017, having had previous AD stops at Houston and Coastal Carolina. Hunter's been a longtime friend and faculty member at Cal's, having joined us several times, and we're thrilled to have him hosting this distinguished panel today. I will also let you know, for those of you who've been with us in the past, there's an opportunity for you all to type in questions that you won't be able to see on your end, but we'll be able to see on ours. So please feel free to type those in as we go along, as we're going to jump in right into this. There's lots to cover. Thank you for being with us, panel. And Hunter, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Well, Will, thank you for those introductions. I'm a little hurt that I was the only one you didn't describe as an expert in some field. John and Martha and Mac are all experts. I'm just your host today. Thanks to everybody for joining us. Many of my colleagues across the country in college athletics as we gather to talk about our favorite subject right now, which is COVID-19. And most of us within college athletics know AECOM Sports is an architectural firm. And prior to COVID-19, that's really, for the most part, all we needed to know AECOM Sports for those of us in this industry. However, due to COVID-19 and the global pandemic, AECOM has been asked to use many of their other skill sets and disciplines to assist various entities around the world during the past several weeks, from the pop-up hospitals that they put together in New York and Chicago and Memphis, to water contaminant monitoring with the Army Corps of Engineers, into working with their friends in the federal, state, and local governments for rapid response. And I do say rapid response. And AECOM is also in the business of recovery with confidence, and that's what we're here to discuss today. Returning our student athletes and our respective staffs and our fans to our venues with confidence, and knowing that we've done everything we can to mitigate their risk to COVID. And I've had the opportunity to meet with Mac and Martha and John, and I'm excited for each of you on this call for them to share their expertise in this area. And so we'll get started first with Mac. Mac, there's a lot of content out there right now. We hear, buzz phrases like venue assessment and industrial hygienist and the hygiene process and hyper cleaning. And what advice would you give my colleagues across the college sports industry listening today with regard to cutting through this clutter? And what's AECOM doing to help with consumer confidence right now?
Yeah, thanks, Hunter. Good to speak with everyone. I mean, I'd start by saying let's all be pragmatic, right? I mean, there's a lot of noise out there. We don't know enough to make any sort of major changes yet. I mean, I think we all know that. But there's a lot of, like you said, content coming our way. Tough to decide. Lots of eyes, particularly on this community. But just implore us to, as a community, as an industry, to remain pragmatic, right? I mean, this could be a seasonal situation. So it's not a one-time thing. We may need to be prepared for us to shutter again, perhaps, or at least respond slightly differently next season that we're going to do this season. So there aren't going to be regulations necessarily yet, right? CDC's come out every day with guidance. Folks, industry groups like ASHRAE are coming out with very important studies and guidance. Some of this is being peer reviewed at the bat. Some of it's being peer reviewed after to get the data out first. So, but it's not in regulatory form. So this is classic risk management in reality. We have to decide, how much care we want to take right now, recognizing that guidance is still coming, but that word is really important to us. And I know to you, that notion of confidence in our facilities, the fans are going to have confidence, we're going to have confidence as administrators and as contractors, but most importantly, our students and our student athletes are going to have confidence. And so, we are starting with if you will, disinfection first. I mean, this is not cleaning for the sake of cleaning. It's not double cleaning for the sake of cleaning. This is a new normal. I mean, I hate to use that word, but we need to focus on disinfection. We've used that word before around our janitorial suppliers, but it now means a little differently now. I think we're not going to be cleaning anymore. Just removing dirt with soap isn't necessarily going to be sufficient anymore. So granted, there is not formal guidance to be followed. So this revised disinfection procedures are going to need to be fluid, but I would start there. That's where we are advising our clients. It's tactical. It's not significantly capital intensive. It's a change in the way you're doing things. There may be some additional labor that's required. It's absolutely a supply chain and product question right now. It's the chemicals you're using, the products that you're using. So in reality, that's what we're helping our clients with, and that's what we're suggesting they start. John will talk a little bit about some of the, frankly, more complicated problems we're going to face with respect to the crowds and queuing and congregation, and those are definitely important thoughts to have. But for now, our advice is started with, let's treat this as, how do we get a baseline of disinfection from a risk management and safety perspective in our venues? How do we instill that confidence that we're going, if you will, slightly above and beyond? How are we prepared for when the regs are coming? Because they're going to come from the county level first. Prepared with a plan, and then begin to think about, and this is done obviously in a low occupancy environment, and begin to think about how we manage spacing and the more complicated things that are influenced by behavior in us humans. So, but I mean, in short, Hunter, I keep saying to folks, let's be pragmatic and diligent though. There aren't products out there that are COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2 efficient, qualified, if you will. We're basing this on prior EPA data on SARS-CoV-1 as an example. Martha will get into this, so be pragmatic, but be diligent as well. There are no silver bullets yet. Nobody's had a product on the shelf that was ready for COVID-19. We're kind of responding with what we have. So Hunter, I'd probably leave it with that.
Well, thank you, Mac. And John, you and I over the past several weeks have had several conversations, both on and off the record, about returning with confidence and exactly what that means. And that's a lot to unpack. But can you share with the group kind of the evolution of that concept to date from an AECOM standpoint?
Yeah, and I think the thing you're gonna hear consistently from us today is sort of the diligence. Trust your experts, do your homework, seek research and guidance from folks like Martha and Mac. But I think from us, the confidence factor was exactly that. We wanted to make sure right away that we understood, because of the lessons, the data, the experience we had with the response and recovery work that AECOM had been involved in globally. I mean, again, we're a global company, so the whole COVID-19 situation hit us really at the beginning of the year in December of 20 with our Asia operation. So we've really been kind of rolling with it, if you will, as it's traveled the globe. So we did have a good sort of sense of what was coming, what was hitting us. And then the temporary work, the field work we did, we were getting a sense of the decisions, as Mac had said, the parameters we would need to make to create healthcare facilities that would allow people to function with safety, a certain amount of standards for an area that I'm clearly not an expert in and don't practice in. But when we got to stadiums and arenas, the whole notion of crowds and the impacts of crowds, that's why we all have been holed up in our houses with beautiful haircuts like mine, beards like Mac's. But we wanted to make sure that when we did talk about getting sports back in the fall, and again, this is an interest that matters to all of us. We all need sports to be back in fall for a lot of our own selfish reasons. And so we're like, how can we help? How can we put a plan together that allows you to come back with confidence, starting with student athletes coming to campus, dorms, training rooms, sanitization. You have facilities that have been mothballed. You don't know what had happened in those facilities when you shut them down in March. How do you know that you can reopen them? And so it was with conversations with folks like Martha and Mac, really just sort of us educating ourselves, that we felt we had something really important we wanted to share with the industry that was different than just, hey, spread your lines out, put stickers on the ground to stay 6 feet apart. All that is very important too. But I think as you're going to hear consistently from my two colleagues, there's data, there's science, there's chemistry, there's guidance from folks who are not architects, frankly, that we felt was really important to give you all the information you need. I mean, we understand, the problem with infections and bacteria in a weight room, and we know how that can create challenges for athletic trainers and a team just trying to work out. Well, now this is a whole new set of problems. So how do you know when you're welcoming a student athlete back to campus that you can do it with confidence? The same way you look a set of parents in the eyes and say, we will educate your daughter or your son. We will take care of them. We will make them into fine adults. We will create a path for the future. You now have the obligation as athletic administrators to look at those same parents and say, your children are going to be safe with us. You're going to have that same obligation to look at fans and donors, university presidents, in some cases governors, health department officials, and say, our facility is safe to welcome fans back. And you're going to need a better answer than, we've spread our porta potties out in the parking lot, we've spread our parking spaces out in the parking lot. You're going to need science, data, and protocols. And so that's when, again, we tapped in very heavily into Martha and our national team at CIH, Mac and his sort of very diverse expertise with commercial real estate. And then it really hit home for us when ASM, sort of global provider of stadiums, arenas, and convention centers, reached out to us and said, you guys have what we need. You're the only one who has this sort of unique collection of experts to help us reopen all of our venues globally, help us put a plan together. And that's when, again, we knew there was a story we needed to share.
Well, Martha, you're kind of the mad scientist of the bunch, and in all candor, up until about 4 weeks ago, I had no idea what a certified industrial hygienist was. And so can you walk us through with this group some of the key points that need to be addressed and considered before allowing our student athletes and our staff and eventually our fans to re-enter our venues and facilities?
We got to let Martha get settled again.
As Martha relocates, it was kind of funny as she's waiting. I mean, And John, I will, I'll throw John under the bus a little bit.
Know your place.
Well, I had to start by telling John what a certified industrial hygienist was, right? Hunter, I might have had to do that for you, maybe when we were first talking, right? I mean, this is not something that you necessarily, come in contact with. Any of us do. I mean, in the environmental space, I spent my career in the environmental space, but this is an industrial hygiene question at the moment. So it is nice to have folks like Martha and that team with us. Martha, you may be off mute, so it sounds like you're ready to go.
Yep, looks like we lost her. Even better. Now let's let her get reconnected. I think the big question, like, and this was a question that was posed to me, just recently. In industrial hygiene, are we overreacting? Are you giving us, people with hazmat suits and respirators on? Are we going too far? Are the recommendations too significant? And I think the thing that's interesting about the work that Martha and her team does, the work that we do with our biocontainment mechanical engineers, people who do HVAC, is they're able to take the guidance, the national guidance we're getting from the different health department officials, Johns Hopkins, and then translate that into relevant information for a stadium or arena toilet, an athletic training room. Martha's a daughter of a football coach. She's a power lifter. She spends time in athletic facilities. So she kind of lives it firsthand. She knows kind of what that means. But even just sort of simple things like, hey, what does a student athlete go through when they're working out in a weight room or on a treadmill? How do we create a protocol for athletic trainers or facility managers to make sure that those folks are not inadvertently infecting themselves? And just that training, she's very clear to say, I'm not a doctor, I'm a health professional. I understand the recommendations and the guidance that we would make to medical professionals or up to health department officials. And some of those dialogues happen together. So I think it's an interesting piece of specialty. It's a specialty that heretofore probably wasn't the most sexy thing that folks had ever done. But I can tell you in the last month and a half, our group of, again, a couple hundred of these folks has been in very high demand because there aren't that many of them out there. And there aren't that many of them out there that have this ability to plug into public assembly venues, sports facilities, stadiums, and arenas, and apply that knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, Hunter, I'm never going to be able to answer the question like Martha could, Hunter. But I mean, some of the things that team is working on, as an example, I alluded to earlier, one of the places we first started was, in fact, what are the products that are going to be most effective to us now, right? We're going to start hearing things like dwell time, right, and efficacy. The way we have been evaluating the ability for a particular biocide or disinfectant to effectively treat for coronavirus 19 or SARS-CoV-2 has been through, if you will, surrogacy analysis, because we don't have that testing currently. I mean, up until 2 months ago, CDC didn't even have the appropriate amount of stores of coronavirus 19 to be even testing facilities for. So it is a lot about looking at the chemistry, the testing that a particular chemical product manufacturer used in their EPA TSCA testing, and then extrapolating that towards the current situation. Luckily, Martha may have returned us to us.
Looks like we got her back for audio, so maybe we could try and get her back online with audio.
Martha, can you hear us? So Hunter, it's where that team started back in February. Over the last month, the team has been very head down, working with ASM Global and a few others on very specific disinfection procedures for very specific spaces in our sports environments. And then it's resulted in, for example,
I'm back.
Yes, getting to some very specific particulars. Like, for example, just this morning, talking about how in your weight room, depending on the clips you use to hold the weights on the bar, which are handled quite a bit, those are some of the smaller things that we need to start thinking about how they need to be perhaps handled differently or even replaced. But anyways, Martha, I did my best smart boy dancing there for a second and waiting for you to return. So yeah, it wasn't that great. Thanks, John. Appreciate it.
So Martha, I'm assuming you didn't hear my question, but if you could explain to the group, because I just learned recently what a certified industrial hygienist is and what your role is, and can you walk the group through some of the key points that need to be addressed and considered before we open our facilities and our venues to our student athletes and our staff and eventually our fans?
Yes, absolutely. It's a combination of biology, chemistry, physics, and we interface with engineers. And so it's a holistic view of science and in particular applied science. As we look at your venues, the multiplicity of opportunities that you have for involvement with the public and also with your student athletes, we first look at the surfaces involved and all the various things that are going to be touched. CDC still puts a great deal of emphasis on high, heavy touch surfaces. So we want to make sure that you eliminate those touch activities as much as possible, but when you cannot, that you have adequate decontamination. We also look at the airflow and whether we can maximize airflow in such a way as that the makeup air makes up for lots of other issues that may be associated with virus accumulation on surfaces or within the airstream. And so it's a very comprehensive approach to trying to figure out how to make that activity as it occurs the most healthy and space efficient methodology to guarantee that everyone stays well.
And guys, I just want to remind everybody that you can questions. We do have a question. I think it's a really good one. And as you know, John, especially, you've spent many times on college campuses, and the college campus is a very complex entity, and it's much more than just their facilities. What has been the approach you'd recommend to help us across our campus communities?
Yeah, and just for those of you that are paying really close attention, every time Mac or I touch our eye, we owe Martha a bottle of wine. So I just did it. And, you know, she's been on me like, do not touch your eye. What do? I just touch my eye. So it's actually a good one, because what we've found, and I'm gonna tee up each of them who work with portfolio-based clients, but on a college campus, you might have a campus health and safety officer. You might roll as part of a larger university system that has those individuals in place. You might roll up to a state level health department official. And so a lot of what we're trying to do specifically for athletics clients right now, we have a couple of folks that are talking to us about engaging on a campus-wide initiative. But for athletics folks, we want to make sure that we're providing complementary procedures and recommendations. There may be something that the campus wants to provide that's overarching guidance, and then they'll leave it maybe to the departments or residence life or whatever it is to develop their own specific and applicable standards or their plan. And so our approach to the larger is not to set you off on an island, but know who those folks are, engage with them as soon as possible, make sure they understand where we're coming from. We're a friend in that dialogue. We're not trying to push a particular point of view or an agenda, but it's sharing the best information from the most number of sources so that we do, again, have a plan that everybody feels good in and has confidence. I'll turn it over to Mac.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add a few things to that. I mean, it's a really good question, Hunter, whoever posed that. You know, in reality, that's one of the reasons we decided to approach this first wave of industrial hygiene recommendations around disinfection at a space type view, right? So that, I mean, if you think about a client with a wide portfolio of assets, or if you just look at your fall sports facilities, you're going to have pretty much every space that a university is going to have, right? You may not have large lecture halls. You're going to have food service. You're going to have bathrooms. You're going to have locker rooms. You're going to have offices. You know, so when you begin to, and then you're going to have the same surfaces. So, for one way to answer that question is that, yeah, part of our assignments have started in the sports athletic departments because they're the ones that are most time sensitive, and frankly, those are the ones that are, let's be honest, driving some economics that are very important to the rest. So So we understand. Listen. If this sounds like a practice speech, because I've said it to my teacher wife several times over the last month when I've been talking about sports, right? So from one perspective, the lessons, the guidance that we're developing will be just as applicable to the school, to the other university pieces of property. And like John said, some of the client, that's going to overlap, which is a good thing. There's also the other way I would look at it is, and I mentioned this earlier, right now it's largely a supply chain challenge. So the university as a whole should be using its complex buying power to make sure they are in fact centralizing what products that they can get their hands on now and making sure the entire university has access to it. We've certainly seen where an athletic department will have a different cleaning supplier or contractor than the university might. So in crossing those together now is important. And we have not found an organization that does not have a task force that crosses those departments. So I think it's a really good question.
I want to offer too that there's a defined element to all of this, which is that it's the athletes, it's the people supporting the athletes, it's the people that are there to witness the sports events, and it's also all the multiplicity of vendors that you have that actually constitute a small city. So we're looking at it from all of those perspectives.
Another question from the group, and I think probably Mac or Martha, no offense, John probably needs to answer this one, but what are your thoughts and recommendations on utilizing the electrostatic sprayers in weight rooms and team meeting rooms and offices as supplemental treatments between activities?
The reason electrostatic sprayers came on the market is that their intent is to disperse the biocide in small enough droplets so that it will stay in the air longer. The reason that became important is that SARS-CoV-2, this virus, can live in the airstream for up to 3 hours. So you essentially want the biocide to stay in the airstream with it as long as possible. However, it is a two-phase approach. Part of it is to disinfect the airstream, and the other is to create large enough droplets through another type of application so that you create a liquid sheen on the surfaces below. And that liquid sheen will disinfect those surfaces. So they go hand in hand.
John, any rebuttal from you on that answer?
I play the role of Ben Affleck in this scenario. I'm like, like me now.
Well, and I'm going to ask each of you to answer this question for us, and I'll go to you first, John. I mean, what's the new normal, or is this our new normal? Is this temporary, or is this something we can expect for the long haul?
Yeah, and I think the point of view that me as a sports architect, because that's I guess what I identify as, we've said this to you, Hunter. We've talked about it internally. We really want people to think about this, a lot of ways, like the post environment of any other either big tragedy, world war. We've talked about it as like post 9/11 because that's the thing people they relate to. There was this whole period of sort of like, oh my gosh, we have to take all these actions around safety, security, hardening, checking, screening, cameras. Like there was all this reaction in a very discrete window following that event. And then we stepped back. We did some data. Intelligence agencies got a little bit more informed. We gathered some perspective. And now we have things like mag and bag. We have clear bag policies. We as a population, and Mac talked a little bit about behavior, we're not as offended by seeing cameras everywhere. We also know that if we go to a football game, the chances of an airplane crashing in the stadium in Fayetteville are probably pretty small. So I think it's going to take us some time to develop some consciousness, but I think as a lot of the health officials, the doctors, the scientists, the folks that help us with research and policy have said, there is an aspect of this that is a normal. We need to be prepared. We need to think about, even if things get better, they may get worse again, and how are we more able to respond? How do we set ourselves up with a facility plan so we don't have to shut everything down and go to our homes for 6 months? Like, how can we do that? So I think what we're doing on the facility side, and again, absolutely with the support of our CIH team and Mac and our engineers, is looking at interventions, series of interventions that get you open now, that are temporary, and then that buys us time for the research and the data and the understanding to get better, So then we can look at what are the right things to do long-term. Again, think about magnetometers. You know, we had wands, we have magnetometers, but there's a protocol there and everybody kind of knows what to expect. They know what their cost of entry is. They know how to staff it. There are people who can advise on efficiencies, et cetera. I think that's where we hope to be at. Is that a year from now? Is that 2 years? I think from our perspective, we want to help save the seasons in front of us as much as we can, and then really get deliberate with plans for next year.
Hunter, I mean, first of all, you know, we could have used, I mean, the 9/11 analogy is obviously, we've all used it. That's a really good one, right? It just, and we didn't talk about the normal then because no one came up with the phrase, but it became a new normal, right? So I do think that's very similar to this analogy now. I mean, I do think there absolutely will be differences to the way we live than the way we were before. I mean, I think, you know, you can look at them in three ways very clearly, right? There absolutely, we will be behaving differently, and we better be. Like, we should not be touching our eyes, right? I mean, as simple as that. And if you haven't heard that as a safety moment, like, bring that home to your house today. Just don't touch your eyes, right? And make sure you are, in fact, really washing your hands, right? And we didn't do that before as men, maybe. And, you know, the concept of, yeah, John never did. The concept of spacing ourselves voluntarily should become more normal. Like something Martha said on a call the other day, which I was just, you know, it really hit home to me. And we were talking to a university about disinfecting their spaces as their athletes were returning. And Martha really thoughtfully said, it's also behavioral training too. Like, who's going to talk to those student athletes, those 18-year-old kids that are super excited to get back on campus about, you know what? Don't spit. And you know what? When you're done running, spread out a little bit, because you're going to be breathing heavy and you're going to be expelling more mucus than you think, and you're going to be breathing in more mucus than you normally would. So spread out a little bit. So first of all, it's behavioral. Like, we all need to change behaviorally in a crowd, ourselves personally, our own personal hygiene. Like, medical clearly will change. We're going to get rapid testing. We're going to get an antidote. We're going to get some medical treatment. You know, it's going to be easier on us in the next month, and it'll be easier on us in the next year, right? So medical will get some intervention. And then to John's point, there will be new engineering controls in place that we'll just get used to, you know, like the security preventions in post 9/11. So you won't be touching things as much as you did before. And you know, you'll see cleaning or hygiene staff perhaps more regularly. Like, maybe the bathrooms and the hand washing stations might become more prevalent, and they might be out in front. You know, there's an interesting call about maybe that's in the front of the mall instead of in the back halls of the mall, right? Because hygiene becomes more important. But in reality, we all hope it doesn't mean every third row or every second seat, you know, in the long term. This is going to come, you know, this is not a one-time exercise. However, I think John's point that he made at the end there is really, really smart to remember. We should react thoughtfully and pragmatically and with science and with diligence now, but don't overdo it. Let's get this season underway. Let's get sports back. Let's see how it works. Let's tweak our disinfection procedures. Let's tweak the way we manage flow of people in a low occupancy environment. And then in the off season, think about what has to stay and what can refine.
Martha, Mac mentioned habits, and that's a big part of the limiting the spread. Let's talk about the habit of wearing a mask. What are your thoughts on that, Martha?
I think that in the short term, we have to look at all options. And so there are certain circumstances where you just can't social distance. And then mask may be one of the things that you rely upon. For athletes, however, wearing a mask is an additional factor that lessens their ability to intake air quickly. And so since that is very important as they conduct themselves as athletes, I think we have to look at other solutions for them. So there's no one answer to any of this. There are some hazards with masks too, because if worn incorrectly, they essentially, if you're the one who is sick, they accumulate the virus inside the mask. And then when you go to take it off, you touch all of that virus, and then you touch something else, and you may be, in fact, more infective than if you've never had the mask on. So we look at it very, very much in terms of a holistic approach as far as what your needs are.
Martha, what are some other educational habits that we can, as we bring our student athletes back to campus and we educate, some other daily habits we should educate our student athletes? I mean, we've heard some of the basic ones. There's some others that you could give to the group?
I think one of the things that that happens is that we go into our adult life, especially with the context of sharing things, and that it's a good thing to share things. In this particular environment, sharing things may create additional problems. An example would be if you go into a facility and there's condiments to use, there's things associated with lotions and maybe even hairspray in the women's restroom. I mean, all of these things that are niceties, things that we like to share with one another. Now, however, they're high-touch surfaces, things that could, after repetitive touching, can harbor the virus for a time. And in particular, if they're oil-based, they become problematic. The next thing goes into polishing everything. There are certain times when polishing is really a good idea, but this virus likes things like polish, likes oils. And so we have to look at it again from the perspective of which is the alternative here. You know, the highly polished surface or a surface that maybe is not so highly polished, but is more amenable to disinfection. I think in general, everyone, as Mac has mentioned, likes to touch their face. But there's other things involved too in the sharing protocols that we deal with athletes when they're looking at the water bottle dispensers, the lips of the water bottles. That sharing element there, if the virus is imparted onto the lip of that water bottle, it goes next into their mouth. And so we really look at it from the perspective of individual need.
So Martha, before you got on, your colleagues may have teed this up, but someone actually asked this question from the group that's watching today, and does the CDC's evaluation statement that this particular virus does not pass on surfaces, that dwell time on horizontal surfaces change your thinking at all?
I did look into that last night. As a matter of fact, I saw the same announcement come out. We looked into the decision logic for it. There are some interesting caveats to that statement. One of them being the actual emphasis in the statement is that it is not passed as easily from touch surfaces, that the main hazard has to do with the discharge of fluid from the mouth and the nose, and frankly, inhaling those droplets. The CDC did not mean to impart, as I read their compendium of information, that a surface was without hazard, just that it was not the same hazard as that direct human contact that we discussed. The other part of their statement is that high touch, or what we call heavy touch surfaces, continue to be a risk and continue to require disinfection. I can tell you in the standard operating procedures that we develop, that we are already cognizant of those things and have taken those into consideration.
So here's another question from the group. Many of us have suites in premium areas that present unique challenges as opposed to general seating areas because of how we serve food, the buffets and kind of the self-service drinks, and whether it's, you know, you're going to fill your cup up or go grab a drink out of a cooler. Any recommendations as we each work with our concession partners about how to manage those premium areas?
Yeah, so these are actually coming from the Food and Drug Administration, from FDA. There's an alliance between FDA and EPA in this regard, but approximately 8 days ago, FDA came out with additional requirements. They're basically saying that passing food out where it's completely wrapped is a good protocol, but that when you receive that food, because the wrapper itself could harbor viruses that you don't want to impart to the food, that you just use one hand to unwrap the food and the other hand to eat the food. So essentially they're coming out with very practical means to essentially still provide those wonderful things that we get to eat and drink within the sporting events and other events we go to.
Okay, so another question from the group. What are thoughts about using an in-air duct disinfection system and UVC lights in our weight rooms?
The UVC lights themselves, the energy levels that they are commonly provided for in things like weight rooms or light dispersion within an area, the energy is not high enough to destroy this virus. It does, however, destroy bacteria. The energy systems within HVAC units, however, because we can operate them at higher energy and smaller area, we do get some efficacy with those. The amount of efficacy against this particular virus, however, at present is unknown. By the way, the wands, from the perspective of this particular virus, are useless.
Any thoughts from the panel about, as we bring our teams back, you know, especially our football teams usually meet in groups and small meeting spaces where they have 10 to a room. We're getting accustomed now to those meetings being through Zoom because of the absence of our student athletes on campus. What are your thoughts about when our student athletes return to our campuses about meeting in these small spaces?
I think it's going to be a progression of thought as time goes forward.
Yeah.
I think at the very beginning, we're going to be in a situation where people want to stay quite a ways away from one another. And they probably won't have that same level of comfort in a small space. I think over time, as we learn more, as we go through this process, things hopefully will normalize. But we're going to have to keep very close attention to all of these factors as we go forward.
I mean, I think, Hunter, that's where, you know, what she said, but then if we were to take like a tight ends room or a quarterback's room, that may be where we talked about like an interim step. Maybe those meetings have to happen in the big auditorium. Maybe some of those smaller position discussions do need to happen virtually where you can. Or, you know, maybe it's as simple as, look, guys, we got to go to the indoor facility if you have one, and we're going to do stand-up meetings because we can spread out. I mean, I think we've all seen the pictures of kids taking AP tests in gymnasiums with the desks super spread apart. That may, I did it again. That may be the thing we need to do, is just some of that short-term logic. But I don't know, as Martha said, at some point, there's no substitute right now for distancing, and we may not be able to put, you know, 10 linemen in a small room because there just physically isn't enough space for them to get apart. So we do need to kind of be flexible and adaptable for right now.
And part of what we're doing too is giving people license to distance. There were some people in the group that would not be willing to stand up and say, listen, I just don't want to stand that close to you right now for one reason or another. And so if it's a protocol that's requirement, we give them some time to adjust, and then we give us all some time to ascertain what the risk really is.
I think that's a really important point. I mean, I think if we as leaders or administrators minimize the risk, our athletes will follow suit likely, and the ones that aren't comfortable speaking up will be the ones that are most uncomfortable in the situation. So it is a balance of both instilling some confidence in those athletes that they can be safe and that we're looking after them and we're accommodating for some more space in the time being, but also an element of risk management. You know, so let's just manage our risk. It's probably more than we need to right now, but let's just not risk getting one athlete affected and then shutting the team, you know, the implications of what happens there. So I think that's a tough question, but.
That's a good one, and it was something that we talked about. I mean, again, we're communicating as a company, as a global company, daily, weekly, you know, sometimes multiple times on this. But this notion of a behavior officer was brought up on a briefing last night. I mean, I think everyone is used to team captains in sports, position coaches in sports, leaders on and off the field, and this may be a discussion about, you know, as administrators to or coaches to your teams. Who's going to be the leader, and kind of coaching up those leaders about being, you know, behavior leaders. The same thing that makes a person a good team captain we might want to talk to those same strong personalities and characters and say, look, we also need you to lead by example and help make this okay. Because as Martha said, some folks, it's still something that maybe people just innately aren't comfortable with, and we need to help them get comfortable with it. And I think they will look to their leaders, if it's their peer or a position coach or an athletic director or whoever it may be, to help guide that way and just make them know it's okay.
As another question from the group, are there any specific recommendations on the electrostatic sprayers as far as some are advertised to have a solution that lasts 30 days or longer versus the ones that essentially just last as they are sprayed?
In our research to date, we do not see any indication that there is a chemical out there that you can spray and then 30 days later it's still going to work as well as the day you sprayed it. So those types of recommendations, if you look closely at the advertisements or the manufacturer's technical communication with you, are often based on one word, germs. And the word germs normally means bacteria, not viruses. For this virus, we think repetitive cleaning events are required. So maybe something will come up tomorrow and we'll have a totally different opinion because a chemical comes forward that when we spray it electrostatically has that residence time, but so far we have not found that to be the case.
So how much is enough? I mean, that's one of the things I think we're all facing right now is how much is enough? When we bring our student athletes back, when we bring our staff back, when we bring our fans back, I mean, is our new norm that every day we're significantly disinfecting all of our facilities to the point where, okay, maybe we have to minimize our in-office hours so that our custodian sanitizing teams can get in and do what they need to do in our office space, and the same with their weight rooms and the common use space. I mean, I think that's what concerns all of us is how much is enough, because I think we all feel like there's some liability out there for us as we bring young men and women back to our campus and our fellow teammates in our Department of Athletics.
Well, it's like any design that you go through. You have to very well document your decision logic while you're going forward with the ideas that you are presenting. In the case of this particular virus, we are very well aware that the high-touch surfaces probably have to be disinfected quite often. You will see some manufacturers coming forward with various products, not just the electrostatic sprayers, that say that you can magically put something on that surface and not have to keep cleaning it. We have not seen that to be the case. The key here is to find a method of disinfection that is not so difficult to do on those particular surfaces. That method of disinfection is available. It's used in hospitals, and it's using a product called accelerated hydrogen peroxide. And with that, we get a dwell time of seconds, and we can quickly disinfect the surfaces. There are other places within your facilities that, yes, you're going to be cleaning them more often than you did in the past. The obvious ones being restrooms, but the maybe not so obvious ones being weight rooms, locker rooms, showers, those areas. It all has to do with use. And so since we know the primary vector for this virus is mucus from the mouth and nose, we look at some of the disinfection involved with those types of equipment too. So things like mouth guards, even the guards in front of helmets. So there's going to be some changes.
I think, Hunter, and this may be the non-scientific answer to Martha's response, but I think everybody on this call, myself included, sort of understands the risk of getting it wrong and not doing enough. I mean, I think look to the NBA as the example of a league that thought they could power through this issue, and then in one night the whole thing came crashing to the ground, literally, with a positive test of a player. And I think as we all understand what's at stake for our universities, our athletic departments, our entertainment, our own mental health. Mental health has always been a big deal in athletics. It's even more of a big deal now. But we understand how important it is to get this right, and not doing enough, whatever that means, is going to have tragic consequences, meaning we may lose another season. The financial ramifications of that for schools and universities, kids and their education and their future. I mean, there's a lot at stake. I don't think anybody's diminishing that. And I think as our friend Mark Payne likes to say, there is no silver bullet. No one's saying there is. What what we want to try and communicate is what are all the things you can do? How can you try to lean into this as hard as possible? I can lift weights every day, 10 hours a day. That doesn't mean I'm still going to be as strong as an SEC offensive lineman, but I could try. I think there's some things like that we just have to try and give best management. It's behavior. It's going to be change in protocols. It's going to be communication. Then we do the best we can.
Well, guys, I'm going to give each a chance to wrap up, but there's a couple of questions that people have asked for me as a moderator that I'm not going to jump in and answer. But if you guys that have asked those questions of me want to get in touch with Will Reese, he can get those questions to me, and I'll be glad to answer them for each of you offline. So please get with Will, and he knows how to get in touch with me, and I'll be glad to answer your questions for you, those who ask questions directly to myself. But I'd like to thank each of you for participating in this panel, John and Mac and Martha, and I'll give you each like a minute and a half to kind of wrap up a very complicated conversation, and we'll start with John.
So I think, again, what we're trying to do today is give you messages, confidence, help support the communication plans you may be doing. I think the one thing we didn't hit on today that is still out there and it's something to plan for is how do you pay for it? Getting a plan, understanding the impact both short and long term. As institutes of higher learning, higher education, you may be available for CARES Act funding. You may be available for potential forthcoming HEROES Act funding. And so it is important that I think everybody think about what their plans are, work with their respective health officials, campus representatives, because there may be federal government funding that is available to help offset or defray the costs of either improvement or enhanced cleaning and sanitization for a stadium. We don't know. I mean, I'm not saying I know, but we have had some athletic clients come to us with some interesting ways of getting creative to access these potential stimulus funds. And I know, within these, there are targeted allocations by state for higher ed. So there is money there for your sector, if you will. And again, that's one of the things AECOM also does. Federal grant writing experience with that, kind of understanding what the different agencies need to see and help evaluating how and ways different grants may be applicable or may have potential to offset, what you likely will see are some increased operating costs.
And John, I think that's a great response, because I know, and I'm one of them, many of us that are on this call, how do we pay for something like this? And so I think you just have put a few options out there for everyone to consider. Mac?
Yeah, I mean, let me add to that real quick. And John is absolutely right. I mean, it's 2.6 trillion on the street right now from the CARES Act, right? And there's 14 billion that are going to higher education. Now that's mostly remote learning, but the FEMA money, the 50 billion that's gone to FEMA, that's a refilling bucket, as our FEMA folks like to say. That's not going to empty, right? It'll fill back up the second we spend it. So, and FEMA's already said life sciences apply, and this life safety applies. So disinfection's eligible. Education about risk to our population is eligible. Signage and PPE is eligible from this CARES Act funding. Planning in certain situations for the additional stimulus funding that's coming out in the summer to have shovel-ready projects is applicable under this FEMA grant projects program. So, there's some testing that has to happen with respect to FEMA and the way they will include, for example, what they might consider recreational components to this, disinfection in non-employee areas as an example. But John mentioned is correct. I mean, we've staffed most of FEMA's recovery programs for the last couple decades. So there is just similar to our somewhat unique certified industrial hygienist team, we do have a very, very strong FEMA recovery team that knows how FEMA reads and writes grants. So I would pass that along to your entities. And even there are low liquidity loans for our private entities as well. And they're not even, they're the limitations there are even less. So lots of money available. I mean, I'll just close when I pass over to Martha. I mean, this is an industrial hygiene question right now with respect to disinfection. I don't think we can overdo that. I would not be buying a lot of fancy equipment that's quoting a lot of fancy potential that you're not seeing publicly. Martha said something clear to me a long time ago. You're not going to get real good testing until we get really good human testing. So be careful with what you're hearing in the market. But for now, at least, it's about making sure we have a real hygiene environment for our athletes, I think, and most in particular. Martha?
I would second everything that was just said. I think that from a collective human perspective and effort, we're finding answers to this. We find answers every day, and eventually we're going to find an ultimate answer. In the interim period of time, we're maybe going to be doing things we never thought we were going to have to do, or maybe we're going to be doing things with a frequency we never thought we would have to experience. But we're going to find answers, and we're going to keep looking for solutions to this problem. I would say in the interim, some of the things that were mentioned in this call are very, very important and have always been important. It's just now that we have a virus that has a different level of infectivity. So when we say don't touch your eyes, that's always been important. So ultimately, hopefully we'll all be healthier and go forward with what we know.
Martha, Mac, John, thanks again. And Will, thank you for putting today together and continuing to do what you do. You're greatly appreciated in all of college athletics. So thank you to Will Reese and Cals for putting this together. And to our panelists, thank you. And for everybody tuning in, good luck and wish you the best.
Thanks, Hunter.
Stay safe.
Yeah.